There you go. Push it once, please.
Okay, my name's Nick. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be clean and sober. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. The business meeting for the group meets every Saturday at 7 o'clock till 7:30 right here. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance to the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. I also would like to read the AA preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to our 6th annual anniversary for the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. We're glad you're all here. And it's my privilege and honor to introduce our speaker, Scott S. from the Underground Group of Philadelphia.
And the crowd goes wild. Good morning. My name's Scott and I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be alive and sober, recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I want to thank Ron for this kind invitation to be here. I want to thank Scott for sharing this morning and you people for being here so early on a Saturday morning. I'm under the weather. I've been in bed sick for a better part of a week. So please forgive me. And during the day to the other speakers, I want to say that, I might be getting up and heading to the bathroom, to the restroom here and there, and please forgive me. So Scott talked about steps 1 and 2, and I can say from my own experience, I spent a lot of years bouncing in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I really didn't know what it meant to be an alcoholic, although I'd put my hand up and say I'm an alcoholic. I had no clue what my problem was. So the odds of me searching out a solution for my problem based on factual information was 0. So I thought if I just could, stay in the meetings and just not drink, maybe act my way into right thinking. You'll hear all sorts of suggestions like that. I thought I was going to be okay, and I wasn't okay. I wasn't okay currently, even when I wasn't thinking about drinking. Sitting here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I just wasn't okay. I suffered from alcoholism on all aspects, on every facet of my being was gleaming with alcoholism. Whether I was drinking, not drinking, thinking about a drink, not thinking about a drink, just sitting here. Just when my eyes opened in the morning, I suffered. And I had no idea what was wrong with me. I wasn't properly armed with the facts. And I don't know if people weren't talking about the facts or I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't interested in it, that's for sure. But I only knew what I know back then, and I only know what I know today. And I come here as a student of the Big Book, a student of Alcoholics Anonymous, not as a teacher. I'm not interested in teachers, especially in Alcoholics Anonymous. I feel all teacher, no student is not a very good deal for a guy like me. So nowhere in our literature does it suggest otherwise that, my job is to be a student of this book, to fit myself. So hopefully today we're going to be able to share our experience with that with you. So step 3 is that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And arriving at this point, I didn't understand very much. Now, I had been suffering from untreated alcoholism with years of sobriety under my belt, chemical sobriety. And I can tell you, if you're sober, if you haven't had a drink in the past 3 days, right now, you are as sober as you're ever going to get. I mean, you could have 3 days separated from alcohol or 3 years or 10 times that. You will never be more sober than we are, I am, at 3 days separation from alcohol, right? But sobriety, I mean, does sobriety afford me recovery? No. Does recovery afford me permanent sobriety? Absolutely. But I had to get moving. I had to do something. And we're getting ready to do that here at step 3. I found out what my problem is, and to admit to my innermost self. That word admit, what's that mean? I mean, when I was a child and you went to the movie theater, that you would get a little ticket that said admit 1. Scott talked about that, to concede to my innermost self. How deep does that, so to admit 1 means to let in. To admit, I have to let in. Let in the truth about my condition, what it means to be an alcoholic. And if I get really clear on not just my drinking, that I am doomed to drink. I am going to drink. I'll do it against my own will. I have done it against my own will. If my experience lines up with the information provided to us in this book, I can get really clear on that if I'm honest with myself. Now, how about what's bringing me into the realm of being sponsored, being willing to go through this work and have some sort of a transformation that I can't even fathom at this point. I mean, I've been at this for a while now, and I can't see God coming. I see God in the rearview mirror. But at this point, where I'm ready to walk into my first third step decision, where am I? I'm suffering. I'm not having a good time in sobriety. I have a beautiful wife, I have a beautiful house, I have all these things. I've reassembled my life in the fashion that I saw fit since being separated from alcohol. And all these things that I've put into my life. Scott mentioned the word worship of other things. Right? All these things that I'm worshiping that aren't working, like my marriage, like my job, like the clothes on my back, like the car that I drive, like the house that I live in, my self-proclaimed position in Alcoholics Anonymous, perhaps. None of these things work. I'm miserable. I'm restless, irritable, and discontented, and I don't know why. I wasn't thinking about a drink. I was thinking about putting my brains on the wall. That's where I was at, and I was blaming her. Blaming my wife. That's where I was at when I got to my first third step decision. I go through the steps once a year with my sponsor. Because, it talks, for one, it says God as we understood him. Well, I don't understand too much. So every year I go through the steps again. I get clear on some more things. It's like a house, spring cleaning, so to speak. I hear people say, well, why do you go through? Well, you don't have to. I choose to. What's the problem? You know what I'm saying? I do it because I like the effect produced by God. I don't know what to tell you. But when I first met my sponsor, I wasn't doing too well. And I remember, my wife at the time, she was an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she would slip these CDs into the dashboard of the car or whatever. And they were like Fellowship of the Spirit stuff from out in Colorado. That's where my sponsor's from. And, my friend Pete down in Florida, she put him in there. And I'm like, man, she was going through the steps with this woman whose sponsor was from out in Denver, from this Fellowship of the Spirit crew. And I'm like, hey, that's great. I'm really glad for you. You need that stuff, But I wasn't interested in it. And then I heard one talk that she had slipped a CD into the dashboard of the car on one of our trips, like up to North Jersey or something, to see her grandparents. And something clicked inside of me, and I got it. I had a first step experience listening to the guy, like what Scott was talking about. When that information reaches where it needs to reach, it changed me. It put a spark in me and a drive in me to go through the rest of this work, and that drive has never ended. If I have a problem with any of these steps, say if I have a problem with step 3, I have a problem with doing my inventory, with sharing it with somebody, with making amends, with continuing on it, I'm having a first step problem. So when that information made it down to where it needed to go, it changed me. I went in search of a guy. I was a seeker immediately. Now here's the trick. That I'll tell you, I had a first and second step experience. I knew that this man had an answer, and I knew he had found it in a higher power, and I believed that this man was actually having an experience. Now, I'm going to go search this man out and have my own experience. But that's when my mind got in there, and I started to have all these physical fantasies about what my life will be like having turned it over to God, right? And spiritual awakening was really a spiritual make-believe, okay? So I had to contend with that at different points getting started. You know, I see it now. Looking back, I can see that ultimately what I ended up having to do here in order to be reborn, it talks about being reborn, made new in step 3. I had to lay aside my immature and childish make-believe ideas about God in order to experience the God that truly is. All right, as the day goes on, perhaps we'll get into some of that stuff, but excuse me. So to make a decision to turn our will, you know, you'll hear people say, "Oh, I'm just practicing 1, 2, and 3. How you doing? Just practice 1, 2. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that? That's not doing anything." And like Scott said, if I have a real first step experience, I'll be at step 3 in about 25 minutes. Because if I have a real first step experience, I know how screwed I am, infinitely screwed. That I'm going to drink and I can't stop it. I'm not going to get a vote and when suddenly shows up and I'm going to end up drunk. And while I'm sober, I'm not having a whole lot of fun. I can't manage my own life. I haven't so much as thought of a drink in over 15 years. I can't manage my own life today. The only way my life ends up working out is if I surrender it to this power. I have to make this decision and try not to renege on it. Every day I wake up and my decision is basically like, God, I will give you my life for my life. If I want to sum my decision up. And I renege on that a lot. You know, maybe by lunchtime. Maybe by the time I get down to the corner, you know, after leaving my house. But if I've had my first step experience, and it's a real first step experience, I'm going to continue to do this. All right? So the word decision comes from the word incision, which means to cut. So I'm heading in this direction and I'm going to cut with this path I'm on, and I'm going to head this way now. All right? And why would I do such a thing? Well, what's life like currently? You know? In the book it says being convinced. Being convinced that what? Well, the ABCs that it talks about before, that I was an alcoholic and could not manage my own life. Currently. That probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism, and that God could and would if he were so. And I'll tell you, I sought safety and comfort in being in meetings, and you'll hear it, you know, God could and would if he were so. We get these chants going and all this stuff, and maybe you're a we think not kind of guy or something. We'll get to that later. You know what I mean? I'm a we think not guy in meetings. I'm dying, man, but I'll be like, God could and would if he were so. I don't believe any of it, right? So I'm going to lay aside that stuff, and I certainly was not a we think not guy. Like, I didn't believe any of those promises, but I'm we think not. Yeah, right. Anyway, all that stuff we do in here, and chants and slogans and all these, you know, who we think we are in here, and everybody likes me, and people leave me alone. I wanted you to leave me alone. That was my main goal when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, was to get you to leave me alone. I don't want anybody pressuring me to change very much. If I could get you to like me and I felt like you liked me, that was enough for me. You know, go out to the diner or whatever. But being convinced of these things now that I'm alcoholic and there's no way I'm going to be able to stay sober on my own. Eventually I'm going to go back to a drink, and my own experience tells me that. And then once I do pick up that drink, something happens in my body that differentiates me. That is what really makes me an alcoholic. I'm addicted to a non-addictive substance. How's that one sound? 9 out of 10 people can drink alcohol with relative impunity. I don't think that qualifies as an addictive substance. Alcoholics are the only reason that alcohol is on any addictive substance list. If 9 out of 10 people can drink it, I mean, they might get banged up if they drink too much because that's what alcohol does. But they show up for life the next day. You know, but you get me, take a drink, and there's no telling when I'm going to stop. And that explains so much. I'm like, man, and I was never able to think the drink through. Ever. Not with the kind of power I needed to, which would be every time. Right? Suddenly would show up and I'd find myself drunk. So I'm going to drink and I don't even get a vote. All right? I'm convinced of that. And I knew that some man that I had heard sharing his experience working these steps and what it's done for his life and this design for living that he had learned to live by. I was convinced. I wanted what he had. I was willing to go to any lengths to get it. And I sought this man out to have some type of an experience. All right? That is the position I was in when I got to step 3. So I decided to turn our life away. It's not a decision to do God's will. I heard that. Well, what's step 3? Well, I decided to do God. No. It's a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. My thoughts and my actions over to the care of God. I'm going to turn my life over to God's care so that I don't have to try to manage my life anymore. I didn't see any of that walking into step 3. I see that now. I'm a rearview mirror kind of guy. It's just my experience. So the first requirement, the requirement here, is that I be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Well, I was convinced of that at the time when I showed up to my sponsor. I had acquired everything that I thought was going to make my life happy, make it pleasant, make it easy, and I was miserable. I was not a happy guy. And if you had to deal with me, a woman, you weren't a happy gal. It's just the way it was. I didn't know what self-seeking was. And I was convinced, I didn't know what self-delusion was. Like, I was convinced that I knew the score. In step 3 is you'll find everything that softens up the battlefield, so to speak, about this unmanageability and what it may look like and how it develops and where it comes from. The source, you'll find it all and how it works. And I'm going to get into some of that stuff. And you just think about it as it pertains to your own life. And I'm not saying when you were drinking. I'm talking about in sobriety. Excuse me. Thank you. Because if we're going to talk about when I was drinking, well, I'm not drinking anymore, so I'm good. And that's not what got me. That's not what's going to get me where I'm going. Not worried about when I was drinking. I'm not drinking anymore. What about now? How am I living my life today? Do I get to recover from the way I live? Scott said something that struck me. He says, I don't think the way I do and do the things I did, like when I was out there and when I first came around. All right? And my sponsor had told me a story about asking his sponsor once when he was really struggling in the beginning with going through this work. He says, do I think the way I do and do the things I do because I'm alcoholic? And his sponsor said, yes, Mickey, you do. And he says, can I recover from the way I live? And he said, yes, you can. And man, that just kicked the doors wide open for him. And he was running around Denver, hey, we can recover from this. Hey, we can, you know what I mean? Because it's like, what kind of anonymous do I need for how I'm feeling right now? I'm not thinking about a drink. I'm not suffering from alcohol anymore. And maybe you are. We got a solution for that too, and it's in the same place that we're going here today. But what anonymous do we need to recover from how we live and how we think? That's what I'm asking myself. These steps aren't going to work for what I got. They're specifically designed for what I got. I didn't have an understanding of what alcoholism really was. My brother died as a direct result of this thing in 2016. And when I was at the funeral parlor, he was active, and that's what killed him. I was at the funeral parlor squaring up with the funeral director. And an elderly couple walks in, and I recognized them immediately from childhood, and they recognized me. They were like, "What are you doing here?" I told them what happened. My brother died. The way he died. Anyway, what are you guys doing here? Well, their grandson had gotten sober and was about 1.5 years, close to 2 years into sobriety, and he just couldn't take it. And he put a gun in his mouth, and he ended his own life. And I would submit that they both died of alcoholism. All right? But other than that, you don't really have to worry about it doing any of this work, It's only life or death. On the bottom of page 60, it starts to talk to us about, like, hey, how you doing? Why are we going to go through with this decision? Why are we going to make this decision, actually? We go through with it later. But what brings us to this point? It talks about the actor trying to run the show. Forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his or her own way. If only my arrangements would stay put, if only people would do as I wished, the show would be great. How many times do we do that in our lives, in our relationships? On our jobs. I'm working for somebody else, I'm sitting here thinking, man, I know how I can run this thing, man. I can't, why aren't they doing this? Why isn't he over there? Why isn't this happening there? Why are we starting at 7? We should, maybe be starting at 7:30 or maybe 6:30. I don't know, whatever I think is best for production. Maybe we should be doing 6 to 2:30 instead of 7 to 3:30. Maybe, whatever. Maybe she should be tickling my back right now. Maybe she should make my eggs, by the time I walk into the kitchen, they should be made. Well, I don't know what it is, I'm never thinking maybe I should be massaging her back. In trying to make these arrangements, the actor may sometimes be quite virtuous, right? I may have my virtuous and noble face on that day. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing, because you need to see how self-sacrificing I am. On the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest, but as with most humans, he or she is likely to have varied traits. What they're talking about here is that self-seeking. Because when I started writing inventory, I'm like, or looking at this inventory process, I see the word self-seeking. And we're going to get into inventory after this talk. Our next speaker is going to talk about that. Right now, we're just making a decision. We're getting ready to make a decision. All right, now, you've heard the old story about the 3 frogs. 3 frogs on a log. One decided to jump into the river. How many frogs are left? 3. Because I'm just making a decision. I need to back that decision up with some action. But why would I do that? Well, we're going to keep going with that. The self-seeking, the behaviors that I'm exhibiting to try to get you to do what I want. What usually happens, show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right. I'm on the job, I'm not the foreman, but I'm trying to be the foreman. And maybe I get straightened out by the foreman or the other guys who are like, who are you, man? You're not telling me what to do. Right now, I think life doesn't treat me too right. I start getting irritated. I'm bent out of shape. I try to exert myself more. Become on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious. Maybe I'm being real nice to you. Hey, how you doing? Oh, man, you look great. Wow, man, that's a nice tie you got there, bro. Man, you got $10? Or trying to get what I want from you by being real nice. I'll be really nice to you to get what I want. I'll be real mean to you to get what I want. This is great in our relationships. Be real sweet and kind to try to get he or she to do what we want. Be irritated and outwardly angry at you to try to get you to do what I want, or do the silent scorn treatment. And when you say, Scott, what's wrong? Nothing. Sitting there with the remote control. Nothing. Thinking in my mind, if you really loved me, you would know what was wrong. We wouldn't even be talking about this right now. Because relationships should be easy if we're meant to be together. Yeah. If you want to experience transformation, get married. But my mind tells me I make stuff up. I'll get into trouble today because I make stuff up. So admitting I might be somewhat at fault, I'm pretty sure you're more at fault. You're more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is the basic trouble? Am I not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Trying to get what I want. Am I not the victim of the delusion? Okay, now they're starting to use words like delusion. Excuse me. Delusion means to believe the false. I want to read something. Just a couple of lines. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. This is on the opening page of chapter 5, How It Works, page 58. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Now, I used to think they were talking about somebody else when I would hear that being read. But now, on page 61 over here, they're starting to use words like delusion, self-seeking. Delusion means to believe the false. So now, I'm a victim of a delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well. Not manage me so much as manage you. Although I am a bit of a control enthusiast with my regards to myself, I send myself right to hell when I make a mistake. You ever wonder why you judge people? Anybody says, "Oh, I don't judge," that's a lie. Straight out. For one, the quality of our lives depends greatly upon the quality of our judgments. That's a fact. Okay, that's a truth. So for me to say I don't judge, I'd be lying. I try not to judge harshly, and I fall short there too. But you know why I'm able to do that? It's because I judge myself. If I could cut out self-judgment, I mean really cut it out, be impeccable with my word, which means to not speak out against myself in thought, word, or deed. All right? If I were able to pull that off, I would have no harsh judgment of others. The only way I'm able to judge you harshly on any given day, at any given moment, is because I do it to myself. All right, that's my experience. So I'm really a self-seeker when trying to be kind. I'm suffering from this delusion that I can wrest happiness. I can be happy if only the rest of the world would do as I want. And can't you see? Can't you see that these are the things that I want? And these are the things that are going to make not just me happy, but you too. This is perfect for relationships. And do not my actions make each and every person that I'm pulling this nonsense on wish to retaliate. Then they want to snatch what they can get out of the show. Am I not, in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And I wonder why I have drama in my life. I love people say, "Oh man, I don't like drama." No, you love drama. I don't try to get involved in any drama, but there's drama swirling around, and it's like there's the common denominator in my life is me. Right? We'll say, "Oh, we don't like drama." Give me a break. So instead of harmony in my life, there's drama in my relationships, and I have to take a look at myself. But I'm not wired to do so yet. I haven't been taught, right? I haven't become a student of this way of looking at my life. That when there's drama in my life, I have to stop taking a look at you. I have to take a look at me. And we'll get into that. The next speaker will start talking about looking to see where my faults are. Talks about being self-centered, egocentric. And it makes a reference to like a retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining of the sad state of the nation. You know, well, watch political news, you know what I mean? Or Facebook stuff, and we'll sit there, oh my God, I can't believe this. Oh boy, I can't believe that's happening. Believe it. If the rest of the world would only behave. Now on page 62, we're going to start talking about what I like to say is mental illness. If you look up alcoholism in a medical book, we're in the abnormal psychology section. Okay? Now, I haven't had a drink in a long time, and I'm really suffering. And I don't know why. My life's falling apart. I have a beautiful wife. I have all these things. I'm crippled with fear about the future. I got a glad eye for the girl that lives across the street because she's been flirting with me for like 6 months straight. I got all this stuff going on. I can't tell anybody about it because I'm afraid. What am I going to do with all this stuff, and why is all this happening? Well, selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. I thought I just had a drinking problem. Driven, not influenced, not moved, but driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Let's back it up. Driven by 100 forms of fear. If I'm driven, I'm not making choices. If I'm driven by fear, I'm doing whatever fear tells me to do. Down the shade, in our next step, in the inventory process, it's going to talk about being classed with stealing. All right? Is it possible that fear has been robbing me from making real choices in my life? And it's doing so today, currently. And I think I'm out there because I'm sober, and I think I'm walking around the streets or in my home or at my job, and I think I have a choice today. You'll hear that in here all the time. I have a choice today. Well, yeah, but am I really taking choices and making choices? Or am I doing whatever fear tells me to do? No choice at all. Just takes it right from me. Being driven. Being driven like cattle being driven across the plain. They're not making a choice in going left or right. The cattle drivers are telling them where to go. Right? Am I being driven across my life by fear? 100 forms of fear. Can I name 10 right now off the bat? We think we're dealing with this stuff by not drinking. That's a we think not moment. We think not. If I'm just not drinking and I'm sitting in AA, what's going on with these 100 forms of fear that I'm being driven by? What about this self-delusion? I believe the false about self or of self, coming of my own self. I make stuff up. How many of us write stories in our mind and the endings are never good? Right? Then we go into fear. And we start obsessing about fear, but we're not talking about this stuff. And we're definitely not talking about this stuff in our local AA groups, man, because then I might lose my stripes. You know, because we have this hierarchy in here of who's what and who's who and who sounds good and all this nonsense. I could talk about this stuff all day long and not do any of it, and you'd never know until you watch my life fall apart. But how many of us are sitting in here with the AA game face on, and we're being driven by this stuff because we're afraid to tell somebody in here that we're alcoholic? As if coming around here long enough, you should be transcending alcoholism. Nowhere in our literature does it suggest that my disease, my illness is going to stop messing with me because of how long I'm sober or how long I'm practicing these principles. Nowhere. But people get judged and shot down as shooting the wounded. Because, that just seems to be what we do. Some of us, what we do best. Or we look up at that speaker, whether it's here or at a conference, and we just, oh, wow, God, just let me go rub elbows with that speaker and get them to sponsor me and my life will just turn. It's nonsense. I have to be dedicated to the truth, and I have to be dedicated to what we're doing right here in these pages. That's how I'm going to get well. The worship of other things that Scott had talked about, mentioned earlier, the book talks about that. It says, talking about pomp, worship of other things, all these things that are getting in the way of me surrendering my life to this power. And speaker worship and my self-proclaimed position in Alcoholics Anonymous worship and all that stuff is one of the #1 offenders. See this microphone in front of my face? It'll kill me. Believe it. If I become a teacher and not a student here in AA. All right, now that I got that out of the way. But self-delusion, man, I believe the false. And it's either about me or coming from me. It's all coming from me, really. It's all selfishness and self-centeredness being the root of my problems. So wherever I'm having a problem or trouble in my life, I can trace my suffering back to self-centeredness. So are you still thinking that maybe they're talking about somebody else with the grave emotional and mental disorders? Here's another good one, self-pity. What's that look like? Well, I'll tell you what, my first wife, I love her. We're friends. We're friends now. We're better friends now than we were when we were married. Go figure that one out. It's because she changed. She had a CD. I remember it said on it, sad songs. You know, the one you slip in and get a good cry in, you know. Well, there's self-pity in one of its forms. You know, trying to take comfort in being sad, and, you know, or let's just speaking out against ourselves all the time. There's a wonderful little book, it's called The 4 Agreements. And one of the agreements it's called being impeccable with your word. And I think of impeccable as, you know, I got my Tommy Bahama shirt on, just, you know, Scott's got his tie on, and, you know, impeccably dressed, and that's not what it's talking about either. What it means is that we do not speak out against ourselves. Negative talk about ourselves coming through our minds. And if I can knock that off, or interrupt it, watch out, right? Have that awareness, then I'll definitely stop doing it about others. But man, I'll tell you, it's a real butt kicker to our growth to speak out against ourselves. And we wonder why, you know, we suffer from that self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. How many times am I trying to get my way and people are pushing back on me with it? Because I'm trying to get my way, and I really believe my way is the best way. It talks about that earlier on. Even though my motives are good, am I not a self-seeker? All right? I'm a control enthusiast. I say that jokingly. You know, it sounds better than the word freak. Right? There's that National Car rental commercial, the guy in the white suit, and he does this thing. He said, "It's a control enthusiast." I die laughing watching that commercial. Control enthusiast. That's great. That's me. You know. You know, he walks to his car and he's all pleased with himself because he doesn't have to talk to anybody. He goes, "I can get my car without starting any conversations." And then he looks in the mirror and says, "Control suits me." You know, it's great. Like, I don't like to have a lot of conversations. I mean, I walked in here, I didn't like people. I really didn't. I didn't like people. Anyway. Sometimes they hurt us. Talking about other people retaliating. Sometimes they hurt us, and then I underline this, seemingly without provocation. I can't see where I provoke people into responding to what I'm doing in a way that hurts me. But we invariably find that at some point in the past we have made decisions based on self. Here we are again, self, which has later placed us in a position to be hurt. And then it talks about, wasn't it self manifested in various ways that had defeated us? So this self thing is like something other than me. It is not me. My sponsor said when I first started going through this work with him years ago, he said, Scott, in your beginning, God created Scott. He goes, but then Scott created Scott. Right? That's where self lives. And he goes, and what we're trying to do here is get you back to the Scott that God created. Less self, more God, more true Scott. Do you feel me? You can see where I'm going with this? I have to. So it's starting to let us know here. We're gonna have to empty out. Right? We're not acquiring anything. Everything that I've acquired up to this point, and to try to treat how I feel. I remember my sponsor said to me, Scott, tell me where it hurts. And I'm like, what? What? No, what are we getting into now? What is this? You know what I mean? Like, the old feelings aren't facts and all. I'll tell you, my feelings are the canary in the coal mine for me today. They really speak to me and tell me what's going on with me. And if I have, I don't know, if I'm desperate enough to search today, I get to get really clear on things, and I get to heal in these areas that I'm talking about now, so that I don't have to be driven by fear. I don't have to be driven by self. I don't have to be driven by my brokenness and be operating out of my woundedness for the rest of my life. I don't have to be led around by the nose by my illness for the rest of my life. I get a shot at a life that has real value. I mean, all life has real value, but I'm talking about purpose. Okay? Not just talking about sobriety here. How much recovery is enough? So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. Not our drinking. This is a formula for the rest of our lives. Our troubles arise out of ourselves. They are of our own making. And the alcoholic, here we go, check this out. Tell me how this sounds for a recipe for success. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he or usually she doesn't think so. Man, I thought I just had a drinking problem. Self-will run riot sounds pretty bad, but I'm an extreme example of that, though I usually don't think so. So later on this afternoon, when I'm really struggling with something I don't have control over, and I see you setting the coffee cups up wrong, or you're doing this wrong, or whatever's going on in my life, and I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, I'm not going to think so. When I walk into my home group and I start to dominate this place, and I'm going to control this, or control my sponsees, I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot. Though my motives are good, I usually don't think so. That doesn't go away. I get to respond to that by practicing this stuff here. All right? When it's happening, I'm not saying we have to be driven by this stuff all day, every day for the rest of our lives. What I'm saying is when these things crop up, I may not think so. I usually won't. That's what I'm saying. Let's not make the mistake of thinking our illness is going to stop messing with us because we're practicing these steps. What I get to say today is thanks for sharing. Have a nice day. And I have some other things I need to do, and the next speaker and all the rest of us after that, we're going to talk about that stuff. To be a recovered alcoholic, what does that mean? Because I heard that a lot. What's that mean, recovered? Well, for one, I no longer think about a drink. Honest to God, I haven't thought about a drink in over 15 years. And for the rest of that stuff that I'm talking about right here, right now, I have a response to that. It doesn't crop up the way it did my first go around through the steps, but it still crops up. And when it does, I have a response. But at this point, I haven't learned what to do yet. This is really just softening up the battlefield. You know what I mean? To get me into this inventory process that I'm making a decision to do. What's it mean to make a decision? A decision to do what? How do I turn my will and my life over to God? What do I do in order to turn my will and my life over to God? This is going to mean more and more to us the more and more we do it. At the very start, it means we're going to do 4 through 9. We're going to learn this way of living, and then we're going to start to develop it and implement it into our daily lives. But for right now, we're going to do 4 through 9. But why are we going to do that? Well, because of the stuff I'm talking about right now. I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I usually don't think so. If that doesn't sound like mental illness, what does? And if we search our own experience and we can't recognize that, then perhaps we don't belong here. Okay, above all, everything, we alcoholics must get rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. All right, we're not talking about drinking right now. We're talking about the selfishness that's been driving us through our lives sober. It will kill us. It'll kill us the way my brother died, or it'll kill us the way that couple's grandson died. Sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. He put his brains on the wall. So it's going to get us. Either way, take your pick. Our lives go into the toilet, or we get drunk and our lives go into the toilet. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. How many of us have been able to pull it off on our own to this point? Not me. There often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Anybody tells you that you can act your way into right thinking in here? I'll tell you what. Thank you very much. Okay? I'm not even kidding. I've heard that. My friend, a very dear friend of mine, fell victim to the circuit speaker sponsor fantasy camp. And I'm not saying that guys out on the circuit don't know what they're talking about. I meet lots of them, and my sponsor's been out there since like 1974, but he's in this book. He's a student of this book. He would never say something as ridiculous to me as act your way into right thinking. I'm going to get to it right here in a minute, and it's in a couple of places in the book that it tells me I can't pull that off. But I remember her, asking this woman to sponsor her after, I guess it might have been a Liberty Bell Roundup or something in Philly. And she just called me, Scott, I'm dying, I'm really suffering. I said, well, what's your sponsor say? Because I know her sponsor. I said, well, what's she say? She goes, well, she told me to act my way into right thinking. And she had to go. And I'm like, jeez. That's not what the book tells us. The book tells us we can't do this without God. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. I can't act my way into right thinking. If I think I'm going to come in here and just do the next right thing, have at it. I failed utterly. That's what it says a few pages back. My human power, as marshaled by the will, failed utterly. I am not going to think my way out of alcoholism. I am not going to outrun alcoholism in sobriety. I am not going to recover from the way I live using my thinking mind. Actually, I'll get worse, though I usually won't think so. So this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. Why? Because it doesn't work. In We Agnostics, it says, God does not make too hard terms for those who seek. And I believe that. That's been my experience. I take a look at this decision that we're coming up to here. Maybe these are the terms. I don't know. Why not? Next, meaning right now, we decided. So if I'm wondering what my decision looks like, here it is. We decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. And what's the director do? The director tells the actors, right? It talked earlier about us trying to be the director. We're the actor trying to be the director. We're playing God, all right, in our lives. No wonder we're so unhappy. No wonder people are walking away from us. No wonder we can't make a living. No wonder we're restless, irritable, and discontented. No wonder we're prey to misery and depression. And let me tell you something. If you're prey to something, you don't get a vote when it shows up. Okay? If you want to know what prey looks like, watch Animal Planet, and you'll see a gazelle getting chased by a pride of lions. The gazelle is a prey item. It doesn't get a vote in when the predator shows up. Okay? So God is going to be our director. He's going to tell me what to do. Now remember, God does not make too hard terms for those who seek. He is the principal. We are his agents. What's that relationship look like? The principal is represented by the agent. The same way Michael Jordan, when he played basketball, had an agent that went out there and represented his best interests, made the best deals possible for him. Right? Am I representing God in my life? Consideration. Is God the principal and I'm the agent in my everyday life? Do I represent God in how I operate out there? Something to think about. He is the Father and we are his children. If I'm going to turn my will, my thoughts, and my actions, right, my will and my life over to the care of God as I currently understand him, wouldn't a comforting understanding of this God, that he is my Father because my Father's going to care for me and give me what I need? Would any of us feed our children stones if they were hungry? Of course not. We'd feed them nutritious food. But how often did the child get one of these? Eating them Brussels sprouts. Get out of here. Now I know there's somebody in here that loves Brussels sprouts. Not me. I'd wait till my parents turned their head and I would throw them behind the refrigerator. True story. And then when my father did his spring cleaning, pull the fridge out and get those dust bunnies out from behind the fridge, there'd be a pile of petrified whatever I didn't like. Right? But my father was trying to feed me nutritious food because he knew what was best for me more than I did. Okay? So if God is my Father and his ultimate goal is to care for me as a father would, God's going to feed us nutrition. We may not like the taste of it along the way, but who knows better for what's going to make us useful in our lives than God? We think we do, though we usually don't think so again, right? When I'm playing God, this page just told me, when I'm playing God in my life, I usually don't think so, okay? So we're going to get jam on our face along the way. And the book suggests that far down the shade. It tells us that we're not likely to be inspired at all times, and we're going to pay for these assumptions. All right? Don't get discouraged with scuffed knees in here. Spirituality is a messy business. All right? Those rainbows and unicorns you see flying past you on Facebook, forget about that. If that gets you in here, fine. But we got to drop that nonsense. And we got to experience God as he really is. I wanted to get drunk on spirituality. How's that sound? Right? It's not that way. So God's going to be my director. He is the principal. I am the agent. That means I represent God. He is the Father and I am his child, and I will be obedient to my Father. And I will accept nutrition from my Father and guidance from my Father. Most good ideas are simple. This concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. The keystone. I'm a master plasterer. I understand construction and the importance of a keystone. An arch is the strongest architectural element on any building. It can take the most weight. Look at the Colosseum in Rome. It's not still standing because they maintained it so well. It's open to the elements, and it's been that way for a couple thousand years. It's still standing because it's comprised of mostly arches. All right? So we're going to, this concept, the position we've taken in our relationship with God is the keystone to this very strong feature that we're going to pass through to freedom. And by freedom, like I said, I don't mean absence of, I mean response to. Okay? A lot of my grosser defects and handicaps, yeah, they've been removed. I was an armed robber for a long time. I don't do that stuff anymore. Okay? I into lots of stuff. But anyway, when I sincerely take such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. A bunch of things here, people call them promises. Some do, some don't. Anyway, I like to call that a promise and a warning. Because if I sincerely take the position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. And what if I'm not sincere? Not so many remarkable things are going to follow. I've done both. I've taken this position sincerely, and I've also taken the third step in a very casual way and said this prayer that we're going to say in a very casual way. And there's nothing casual about turning our will and our life over to the care of God. There's nothing casual about surrendering everything that I am over to this power. And it's not a casual experience that I'm going to have going through this work. This stuff is going to take me apart. This work is going to break me down. It's going to destroy me to be rebuilt. I have to be leveled. Earlier on in the sections that Scott was talking about, it says, there is a solution almost none of us liked. Oh, well. This is the road less traveled. Believe me. And I don't say that from any position of pride. You know? Untreated alcoholism was killing me for years before I was willing to submit to this work. So we had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Right? Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, in our little plans and designs. I'm less and less of a control enthusiast. Become more interesting in seeing what we could contribute to life. How many of us go to AA meetings to get what we need? Come on, put your hands up. You know what I'm talking about. All right, well, how about this? How about we go to AA to serve and not be fed? And we'll never go hungry again. I used to think I went to AA to get what I need, to get my medicine or anything. I tell you what, I get my medicine here, and then I go to AA to share that, to carry that message. I show up to serve, not to be fed. And I've never experienced a bad meeting again. I remember after going through this work for the first time, I started going out to my local AA meetings, locked and loaded. Shooting the wounded, you know what I mean? I'm going to beat you over the head with the big book. Having had a spiritual awakening, I pick up my spiritual bat and I'll club you over the head with it. I would go to living sober meetings where they don't want to talk about the big book, they want to talk about the living sober book. And I'm in there like slamming them with the big book, man. And I did this for like 2 weeks. In the first week, I had inventory written on AA. Mickey listened to it. Got me to see the truth. Because I have an appointment with him every Friday night at 6:15. And I mean, I call him anytime I want. I'll do 10-step with him throughout the week. But every Friday at 6:15, we have an hour. And I do that with the men I sponsor. I get to sponsor about a dozen guys today. And effectively that way, Monday through Friday, between 4:30 and 7:30. I have appointments lined up with guys, you know, and because that's how I was taught to me, you know, that's my experience, being sponsored. So the next week I have more of it, and I go to read it, and Mickey's like, hold on, Scott, so you're a spiritual thug now, is that it? And I'm like, oh, okay, that snuffed the candle right out, you know. Anyway, I forget where I was going. More and more we became talking about coming to AA to serve. Seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully. As we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. We're going to be made new. We're going to get squeezed. I watched my son being born. It didn't look too comfortable for him. Right? So does this new trip need to feel good in order for me to stay on it? I mean, I know alcoholism comes with a lot of immaturity. It really does. I can admit it. But does it need to feel good in order for me to stay on this path? Because I'm in serious trouble, if that's the case. All right, now there's a third step prayer, which is an affirmation of the decision. And if you'd like to join me in it, I'm going to say this prayer. Now, the book says the wording, of course, was quite optional so long as we express the idea, voicing it without reservation. All right? But I'm going to choose to do the prayer as it's written. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Now, I talked about doing this prayer in a very casual way. I've done it. Taking this step in a very casual way. And it tells us immediately after this prayer is that we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready. That we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. Take a look at the words that they use. To abandon myself utterly. Now, a good friend of mine says what that tells him is that his life is no longer any of his business. And I thought that sounded like some real spiritual ninja stuff to say. But I'll tell you what, my problem is, you better believe my life's my business. I'm wired that way, okay? And so I come up against that. I come up against that all the time. Is that my life becomes my business that fast, though I usually don't think so. All right, so these are the things that we're going to have to start paying attention to, watching out for. And the body of work that we're getting ready to go into, it's going to start to show us. We're going to start to scratch the surface on some of that stuff, okay? Where we're getting in the way of abandoning ourselves utterly to Him or her or whatever your concept of God is now, trust me, it will change. Our own conceptions, however inadequate, were sufficient to get us to this point. But trust me, my ideas about God have gone from here to I can't even reach that high, and I'm still inadequate. Because there's no way you're going to wrap this mind around God. All right? It's not going to happen. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But I had to really get down to the truth about God. So what I did was, I said, I'm going to be dedicated to the truth. Because that's where our inventory process takes us, to the truth. If we want to see where God is, seek truth. Okay? I love this word here, and it talks about taking this step with an understanding person. Because back then there wasn't none of this. What we're doing right now, we are in like the spiritual jackpot time. Where we can find people to sponsor us. We can find people that have experience with this. We can find people with 10, 20, 30, 40 years sober that have been doing this for a really long time. And they have that experience of being a student. These guys, you would get the book mailed to you. If you were fortunate enough to hear about this book, it would get mailed to you. You go through the book on your own, reading it, because we know how to read, right? And if you're desperate enough to get to the other side of this body of work where you can actually sponsor somebody with experience, as little as you had, share it with somebody and build upon that, create that fellowship you crave that they talk about in the Vision for You. You can, if you get to that point, you get a little group that you can share your inventories with and do a third step prayer with. But they didn't have what we have. But again, it talks about the wording being optional, but expressing this idea, making this decision without reservation was a beginning, but if honestly and humbly made, the effect was a very great one. Could be felt immediately. And I know that from experience, man. I was eager to get into my inventory, even though I was incapable of being honest about it when I did get into my first inventory. Maybe get to that some other day. But there's another wonderful word here. Earlier when it said next, we decided. That means right now, we decided. And then we got next, we launched, which means right now. When do I do a fourth step? Immediately after saying my third step prayer. Next, right now, I launched. We all have seen space shuttle launches, right? Man, they're launching. They're going. We're going to launch into our inventory. They refer to it on a course of vigorous action. So there's nothing casual about that either. It's like when you go to the gym, you go and you work out. You work out vigorously. You don't go into the gym and go hit the snack machine and sit back and watch everybody else, right? Well, if you do, you're not going to get the results you're looking for, are you? So you're going to get in here in a course of vigorous action. The first step of which, we're at another first step. Yeah, this is just the first step of a way of living here that's driven by step one, but we're at another first step here. This personal house cleaning, which many of us have never attempted. I'm too busy looking at where you're at fault before I'm going to think about where I'm at fault. Though my decision, right, that decision that I just made, and that prayer that affirms my decision, though it's vital, life-giving, and crucial, it's absolutely necessary, it can have little permanent effect unless at once, right? Another action word, at once, right now, followed up by a strenuous effort. Now we're back into it again. Vigorous action, strenuous effort. To be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. We don't have to go out and acquire anything. We're going to get rid of stuff. So when you think you have a hole in your soul, I would submit that there is no hole in my soul. I would submit that I'm so full of self that I feel empty. All right? It's not a process of acquisition. It's a process of removal. We're going to get rid of things that have been blocking us. Blocking us from what? Blocking me from God. Liquor was but a symptom. My drinking was but a symptom of alcoholism. We had to get down to causes and conditions. What makes Scotty run? Okay? That's it for me for now. And we'll take a little break, I suppose. Right? Thank you.
Thank you, Scotty. Great job. Can we take a 5-minute break and then we'll adjourn back here? The steps are a little mixed up today because of time constraints from our speakers, so I think we got the 9th step next or something like that.